Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be talking about specifically what it means to have your Mercury in Gemini or your Mercury in the third house. So welcome, my name is Brandon. I do astrology videos here on YouTube, and I will be talking about specifically the Gemini and third house series today. This is my Mercury video within that series. So if you have your Mercury in Gemini or Mercury in the third house, this video is for you. There's going to be timestamps below that you can kind of skip around to kind of just get to that information, because I know how quick Gemini information is and how much they're able to digest and how much they're able to take in. So feel free to skip down below to look at those specifically and see when I talk about what. In addition to that, I'm going to be talking about what Mercury kind of means within a natal chart. Prior to all of that, so that will also be an additional portion in here. And then of course, like always, as you guys know, YouTube videos, so feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe, all of those things that you hear every YouTuber say within their just vernacular. That is part of what I have to say here too. And then also, if any of you are interested in any sort of readings or offerings with me, my website is linked below and you can see all that information there. So without further ado, let's get started and let's talk right off the bat about what is this elusive Mercury. So Mercury is a very unique planet because the thing about Mercury is it has a lot of themes related to adaptability, related to merging. So it does rule Gemini, which is why this will be quite a very interesting combination to talk about. And then it also rules Virgo. Within the Mercurial domain, there is going to be the daytime Mercury, which is Gemini, and the nighttime Mercury, which is Virgo. And they have a very different way of expressing themselves. Obviously, I'm going to go quite deeply into Mercury and Gemini today in specific. But for the most part, Mercury in Gemini, because it's diurnal daytime, it has more of an extroverted sort of representation of Mercury, and then Mercury in Virgo is more of an introverted sort of representation. In addition to that, Mercury will also very much, because of its adaptability, it will adapt to whatever planets it's around, whatever sign it's in. So it's really important to look at Mercury, specifically if you have Mercury in Gemini as well, because Mercury in Gemini is going to function so well, but you need to look to see what aspects Mercury is talking to, because Mercury's conversations, specifically in its domicile, become a lot more prominent. So those aspects are gonna lean a lot more and become a lot louder, because those communications with Mercury are a lot easier to have when it's in its own sign of Gemini. So those aspects become a little bit more really keyed in to that specific aspect. And so Mercury does have this communication aspect. It does also have a lot to do with your mind and your opinion. So wherever Mercury sits within the house or within the sign, it's going to be the area of life that you kind of put a lot of mental focus towards, a lot of mental energy. A lot of your thoughts and your opinions are focused around that specific sign and house and aspects, and the ability to really speak on a lot of various subjects. And when Mercury is in its own sign of Gemini or in Virgo, it's going to definitely have a lot broader range of things, and it's going to kind of express itself very purely in a lot of ways, but it will also do different things depending upon what Mercury is doing in the chart. And the thing about Mercury, there is a very big importance with this, and I've kind of said this in every Gemini video, but it's important to know what whether your Mercury is retrograde or direct, because having a retrograde Mercury, especially as any Gemini placement, is going to flavor the way that you are interpreting information, and how you are capable of processing and regurgitating that sort of opinion or your opinions onto others. So it's really important to look at that as you kind of go through these charts and as you go through the Gemini week in specific, or any sort of mercurial rulership. And now, with that as well, Mercury rules quite a few different things within astrology. It rules trade, it rules merchants, it rules writing ability, our opinions, our voice, our vocal ability, our ability to utilize our hands. So anyone that's really Mercury dominant will tend to create a lot of, verbal content, write a lot of things, but they can also create a lot of physical products with their hands. We see a lot of jewelers that have Mercury prominent, or a very powerful Mercury, whether it's in domicile or not. So there's a lot of emphasis there. In addition to that, Mercury, because it does rule Gemini and Virgo, there is an aspect of it when it is in the opposite signs of those, being Sagittarius and Pisces. It can struggle a little bit more in trying to formulate the right sort of communications. And the thing about Mercury is it's very logical, very thought and focused on information. And so depending upon where Mercury's at, the aspects it's having, all those sorts of things are going to layer a lot more of these sort of lessons. So Mercury, there's going to be so much I'm going to talk about because it's Mercury, of course. So we're going to have a lot of different conversations around this specific topic. But with that being said, we're going to move in specifically to what it means to have Mercury in the sign of Gemini. So Mercury in Gemini has this quality to it where it's very pure, right? And I talked about this when I did the Venus in Taurus portion, and I believe I talked about this as well with the Mars in Aries portion. But when we put planets within their own sign, it kind of makes the lessons a lot more prominent, right? So with Mercury in the sign of Gemini, yes, it's going to make your communication really, really pure, really, really instinctual, really natural, the way that you understand things, right? This is just Mercury and Gemini alone, not with aspects, with difficult squares or things of that nature. But the thing about Mercury and Gemini, it's going to create really good communication. It's going to communicate those lessons between those aspects very clearly, and your ability to understand them are going to be really, really bright and easy for the most part, or smooth. It should be a lot more clear for you to see the error or to gather the information relative to what Mercury is doing within your chart, whether it's a conjunction, square, opposition, trine, all those things. You're going to be able to see and understand and gather that information a lot more rapidly. So for example, if you were someone who was getting an astrology reading as a Mercury and Gemini person for the first time, and you have, these specific aspects like a trine to Jupiter or a square to Saturn or an opposition to Pluto, which would be, that would be true for anyone that is pretty much Gen Z and has Mercury in Gemini. Any of those sorts of delineations that someone would say in an astrology reading, you will be able to kind of pick up on that and be able to immediately kind of understand what information from your own life and your own opinions kind of ties into that. You'll see that a lot with Gemini placements, is their ability to really understand the information that's given to them really, really quickly and see how it applies and see how it works and gather those facts and that perspective from either the person they're talking to or from their own lived experience and be able to say, this is what it is, right? This is how I came to that conclusion, or this is how I'm relating to that information. And so they are great speakers. They are great communicators. They have a very strong mind. They're, like I said, the issue with Mercury in domicile, or any domicile or dignified placement for that matter, it almost makes the lessons of that planet so loud that your Mercury, with it being its own sign, this is very similar as well with Mercury in Virgo, where the conversational aspect becomes so prominent, and it is great for you to utilize it, that you might not be seeing the other parts of the chart that might need to be addressed with that really strong Mercury. So for example, if you have a really strong Mercury but not as much of a strong Mars or Jupiter, especially Jupiter, there's going to be there's going to be blind spots that your Mercury can see and communicate a little bit more clearly. There will be blind spots within Mercury's gaze, right, with things it's not aspecting and conversations it doesn't really understand. But for the most part, with you having such a strong mind with Mercury and Gemini, you're capable of really understanding a lot of information really, really fast. And you are able to, when you're presented with the new information, be able to work with it, okay? Now, Mercury here in Gemini does have a strength, and I would recommend you utilize that strength to understand your weaknesses. And what I mean by that as well is understand your blind spots, understanding your faults, understanding how to communicate those faults, how to work with those faults, how to really analyze the information that's being presented to you and analyze the information from your own lived experience, and be able to say, this is what I want to do with it, this is what I don't want to do with it, this is how I want to utilize it, this is how I don't want to utilize it, right? And knowing what your blind spots are, knowing what your specific concerns are. Like for example, if we put Mercury in Gemini but put it in a house that isn't really super visual, meaning like the 12th house or the 8th house or the 6th house, it's still going to do really well. It's going to protect those those themes and make those themes really, really solid. But for example, with Mercury in the 12th house in Gemini, there might have been some mental health struggles. There might have been, some difficulty with that. But at the end of the day, with that Mercury in its own sign, it's going to allow you to take a lot of lived experience from that difficulty and be able to converse with other people that maybe, have dealt with mental health, or that may have spiritual inclinations as well, because the 12th house rules that sort of spiritual occult inclination too. So just think about like where your Mercury is placed by house, because with Mercury being in the sign of Gemini, it's going to create quite a lot of mental activity and a lot of strength in the mind. So it's how you're utilizing that strength, how you're coming to terms with that, how you are speaking about the things that are being presented to you and understanding them and regurgitating them, and being able to be open to different opinions, right? And the thing is, with Mercury and Gemini, once again, as we all know, there's this kind of like this feeling about Mercury in the sign of Gemini that is relative to this two-faced quality, this manipulative quality, which we see with most Gemini placements. That's because Mercury is literally the trickster planet. It's the one that is related to how our mind is able to kind of play tricks on us, or our ability to understand the world or to communicate about specific things. We're able to know something is not true and still communicate that, right? That's why where lies can come in. Mercury and Neptune are really the only ones that really lie, and deceit. All planets can kind of do that with their own regard, but Mercury is the planet that is most capable of turning something mentally and utilizing its own mental capacities to spin something, right? And with Mercury and Gemini, you can see a lot of really amazing, wide range of people. You could see people that are amazing poets and writers, and you see that typically with Mercury in its domicile. You're gonna see a lot of really prominent power in the way that they communicate, and a lot of strength in that area that they're going to utilize to kind of overturn a lot of their own issues and overturn a lot of their blind spots and their difficulties within their chart. But at the end of the day, that Mercury in Gemini can do so many different things. It can be a really great, like if Mercury is well placed, this is kind of niche, but because Mercury does relate to that manipulation of information and that quick-witted nature, Mercury and also Gemini placements, if well aspected, can make for really good like pickpocketers and people that are able to, hack into systems, and hackers and cybersecurity and lawyers and anyone that's really able to utilize their mind in a very rapid way to really understand the situation and to find the right words to said situation to do it for either their benefit or the benefit of someone else. And so that's why Mercury in Gemini has a lot of power to it. It's very different than Mercury in Virgo, because Virgo has more of a inner healing aspect to it. Gemini is all about trying to utilize the information that's being presented to them in the best way possible for whatever Mercury is trying to do. And if we have, like, let's say we have a Mercury-Pluto aspect, which would be true for anyone that, for the most part, that has Mercury in Gemini and as Gen Z, you're going to see that there's going to be a very large information overload and mental power struggle with the information. So these are people that more than likely have been verbally, mentally abused and need to understand the power of their mind through a very disempowering set of circumstances. And so Mercury in Gemini has a lot to say. It's just a means of figuring out how the best way is to say that, what they want to say about it, where they want to go with it, all those sorts of things that Mercury really does within the sign of Gemini. And it is also important too, because Mercury can only go one sign away from the sun, it is important to see where Mercury is relative to your sun sign. Because if Mercury were to be in Gemini and you're somewhere to be in Cancer, or you're somewhere to be in Taurus, those would be very different stories than if your Mercury were to be in Gemini and you're somewhere to be also in Gemini. There'd be a very different quality that you're able to kind of bring to the story, and a different gift that you would be able to lend to your sun sign that is different than what it would be if your sun and Mercury are both in Gemini, because that's just kind of a doubling up on the mercurial nature of Mercury in Gemini when it's with the sun, and the sun is kind of wanting to see those things as well. So there's a lot, when Mercury's with the sun in Gemini, there's a lot more of a information-based focus and a lot more obviously Gemini themed in the chart. but a lot more of a focus on understanding and identifying with the information that you're given, as opposed to just utilizing the information you're given. There's a really big difference. And these are people that with the Sun and Mercury in Gemini, which is very, very common. These are the people that more likely would be, published authors and would want their names on things, versus like, let's say if it were Mercury in Gemini with the Sun in Taurus or Sun in Cancer, you would see people that are more likely to lean towards financial security type of conversations, or hacking, or different sorts of information around homeland security. You could see that a lot with like Sun in Cancer, Mercury in Gemini. There's a means of utilizing Mercury for whatever the Sun is wanting, but also for the rest of the chart too. And that's why the aspect's really important. That's also why it's important to look at Jupiter, because Mercury is the information you're dealing with, how you utilize the logic that is being presented to you. In the sign of Gemini, you're going to have a lot of information. You're going to be able to process it really well. But Jupiter is where that meaning is being placed, how you're finding meaning within that. And so let's say you have, Mercury in Gemini, but you have Jupiter in Capricorn. And the thoughts need to kind of be in alignment with beliefs that are outdated, right? And so there's a need to understand all of the belief systems and be able to say, this is no longer for me. Let me work on bringing in new information and establishing new understanding of what information is being presented to me. Because Mercury and Jupiter, both Mercury and Jupiter and Saturn work really well together, because Mercury and Jupiter have a very opposing nature, where Mercury is kind of information that's being presented to you, the knowledge, the empirical data that you've been able to gather from your own lived experience, the kind of thoughts and opinions and information that you have been exposed to. And then Jupiter is more on the larger, grander scale of like, what are we doing with this? What's the meaning behind this? The philosophy behind the information, not as much as the actual facts and the gossip and the conversations, but the kind of bigger, broader picture of why this information is being presented to us. And so it's important to look at what Saturn, but what Jupiter is doing within your chart in addition to Mercury, because there's going to be a very big kind of like enlargement when it comes to Jupiter, whereas Mercury is very different. Mercury is this messenger, this ability to kind of speak through a lot of different things and talk about a lot of different facts and figures and information, and kind of do this kind of like back and forth communication. And Jupiter also has a little bit of that quality to it, but it's a little bit more on the broader, larger scale, not necessarily on a smaller scale. Not necessarily meaning that one is better than the other, it's just simply understanding the range of those two things, and that's why looking at your Jupiter sign is going to help you too, specifically with this powerful Mercury in the sign of Gemini. So there's a lot there that I think I love Mercury and Gemini. I think you guys have such a powerful voice and a powerful information to present to the world, and I would love to hear your story about Mercury and Gemini, because I am the opposite end of that. I have Mercury and Sagittarius, and I am very different in the way that I communicate than those that have Mercury and Gemini, and you guys have such a unique quality to the information. You could probably tell that I am not a Mercury Gemini individual while you are listening to me speak, because it might be all disjointed and all over the place, but there is meaning and teaching and philosophy behind my words with that other side of the coin there, with Mercury and Sagittarius. So that's really all I had to say on Mercury and Gemini. Obviously, I could talk much more on this because Gemini placement, love information. But I will see you guys in the next part, where we'll talk about specifically what it means to have Mercury in the third house. But before I say that, obviously, if you guys are interested in any information from me, any readings, any sort of thing to that nature, that is down below in the description box as well. So I'll see you guys in the next part. We're going to talk about what it means to have Mercury placed in the third house. Okay, guys, so we're going to be talking about specifically what it means to have Mercury in the third house. So the thing about this that's a little bit different than Mercury placed in the sign of Gemini is that you are going to have Mercury placed in the third house, and it can be in any sign, meaning that there are a lot of different themes that are going to be relative to this. Overall, the lesson related to the third house is related to your information, your knowledge, your opinion, your voice, how you share those things, how you communicate and sell yourself, and how you are able to further understand where you fit and communicate that to somebody. And so Mercury within the natal third house is going to have this this quality of searching for a lot of different information, searching for a lot of different ways that their opinion is valid. They're going to be having a very sharp mind when it comes to what they are trying to understand in the world and how they're trying to move about the world. So these are the ones that, obviously, and I've talked about this with the third house portion in the previous video, but the the ability to specifically drive is related to Mercury in the third house, so as well as write and read and all of those things. So someone who may have an afflicted Mercury in the third house may have grown up in an environment that was a little bit difficult to learn how to drive, or may struggle to get their driver's license, or may struggle to read or write, or have a little bit more of a different approach, especially if you have Mercury in the sign of Pisces in the third house, or if you had, Mercury in aspect to Saturn, there might be a little bit more of a difficulty there. Mercury in aspect to Jupiter, or Mercury in a Jupiter sign may give you too much information, maybe information overload, or there may just be a lot of conversations around philosophy and religion and spirituality, and a lot of knowledge in that regard that is pressed upon you. So it's a lot about knowing specifically what what conversations are being had around you as relative to kind of the sign that Mercury's placed in, and also how you're going to communicate those things and how you find meaning. So Mercury's going to do a slew of different things in the third house, but at the end of the day, it is all going to be relative to you figuring out how you communicate your truth, how you understand the world, how you put the words into your world, and how you find the right, ability to do that. And so, for example, I don't have Mercury in the third house, but I have an afflicted Mercury, and I had to do speech classes when I was much younger, and I actually do public speaking for a living now, which is quite interesting. Where there was overabundance of information, and I would stutter a lot, and I still kind of stutter a lot in these videos. And it's something that knowing that my Mercury was afflicted with a lot of abundance and overabundance, and needing to kind of ground that and slow that down, was something that was able to assist me in my ability to communicate when I do more so public speaking. Not as much these videos, these are very off the cuff kind of Mercury Jupiter moments, but Mercury in the third house will show you the information and the upbringing and kind of the conversations you have in your formative years and kind of those sorts of things. And so when we see that there's like a Mercury, for example, in Aquarius in the third house, or in Libra in the third house, you're going to see a lot more of a socialite, a lot more someone who is going to want to communicate more about a lot of social aspects of different things, versus Mercury in a water sign in the third house is going to have a lot of different emotional conversations. These are the ones that I really lean into, that are fiction writers, that are creative writers. More so Mercury Leo with this, if we see Mercury and Leo in the third, but Mercury in any water sign, Scorpio, Cancer, or Pisces in the third, especially Pisces in the third, can have a lot more creative, artistic, musical abilities and musical kind of poetry within their ability to communicate those things. And Mercury in a water sign too in the third can definitely, these are the people I would lean towards therapy and finding ways to communicate their feelings and how to utilize those emotions for other people, especially if Mercury is an aspect to the moon in the third house. There's going to be a lot more of a need to communicate those feelings and know how to find the right words for the feelings. Now, Mercury in the third house in, a fire sign is going to have a very different quality. They're going to really want it to be about them, and they're going to want to communicate a lot of different things. Be very bright about their opinions, be very strong about their opinions. And so we see Mercury in fire, like in Aries. This is someone who is going to kind of pioneer a new thought, typically. That's what we see a lot with Aries. Or someone who is really meant to stand on their own with their own opinion, not necessarily pioneer a new thought, but might have to just stand their ground. We see that as well with Mercury in Scorpio, but Mercury in Scorpio is a little bit different. There's going to be a lot more of a, similar to the Mercury-Pluto opposition that I spoke about in the previous portion, there's going to be a lot of power struggles within the conversations with their family, and how people have communicated with them, and how much of a distrust they may have of their own mind, and how much their mind may stress them out at times. And so we see that a lot with Mercury in Scorpio in general, but Mercury in the third house, it doubles up on the importance of the acquisition of knowledge and the acquisition of your own opinion and the ability to communicate your own opinion. Now, with this, the thing that's interesting about this, and I will talk about this more when it comes to Venus in the third house, but when you have Mercury in the third house, you are almost guaranteed to be a night chart, meaning that there is going to be a very different way that you're going to communicate. You're going to naturally be a more lunar person. You're going to have more of a softness to you. You're going to have a little bit more of a more sensitive communication. So when Mercury is below the horizon, it's a lot of conversations relative to speaking about your lived experience, understanding your identity, understanding your sort of journey, your sort of opinion, your way of communicating your experience, whether it's different from your parents or your siblings or not, being able to find the right words to what you went through. And so when we see Mercury at the bottom of the chart, on the bottom half, 1 through 6, we're going to see a lot of just really self-focused kind of conversations and self-focused information and ability to really tune into what information is relative to me and me alone and what I can build, and not necessarily always focus on other people, right? Obviously, if we have Mercury and Libra in the third house, it'll be very, very different. But for the most part, Mercury in the third house is all about figuring out your voice, how you can communicate your voice. And there's going to be signs and aspects that are going to change that and layer that. But there's a lot of conversations around, conversations around facts and figures and appropriate ways to communicate and appropriate ways to understand what you're being presented, and being able to regurgitate that. And so Mercury in the third also can have a really great teaching quality. I didn't really say this for Mercury and Gemini. Gemini is like the natural kind of teacher, but it's between that student-teacher kind of dynamic. So they can definitely have more of a creative quality to their communication, right? If we see Mercury and Leo in the third house, that's someone who could be an amazing creative writer and creative, music director, or someone who works with children's theater, and those sorts of things. We see that a lot with the natural trine between Gemini and Leo, where there's a lot of kind of like childlike, kind of supportive conversations and childlike nourishment and knowledge and teaching, those sorts of things with Mercury in Gemini with the third house there. So Mercury in Leo or Mercury in the third house in Leo is going to have this very like childlike, communicative, creative aspect to it. These are the ones that I would say make art, create art, do more things with art, and really, really understand specifically what they want to create and what art they want to lend their light to. Now, Mercury in the third house in Taurus is going to be a little bit different. This is going to definitely have more of a financial focus and a financial kind of like wealth building sort of conversation, a lot of information around those things. These could be really great for sales. Like this is probably one of the better ones for sales. Mercury in the second house can definitely have that as well, but Mercury in a Venus ruled sign in the sign of the third house, or in the third house aspect of the Venus or something to that effect, or a good aspect to Venus or a good supportive Venus is going to really help a lot of this sort of conversation here around money. Mercury in Cancer in the third, I kind of already went over that, but just a lot of conversations around family and family secrets and the mother's secrets and, emotional conversations, emotional nourishment, being able to help people kind of connect to their own emotional center. We see, I already talked about Mercury in Scorpio. Mercury in Pisces definitely has Mercury in Pisces and Taurus both have this really artistic quality to them, and this very creative, musical, visual art that they tend to lean into with that Mercury placed in Pisces in the third house. Mercury in Virgo in the third house, this is going to be someone who would likely be a lot better at the analytics, and this is a really good one. This would be someone that could write a really great dissertation on a lot of very interesting things. They could be really great health advocates and mental health, physical health, spiritual health advocates. They could also do really great at architecture and things of that nature. And same with Capricorn, kind of any of the Earth Mercuries in that sign can do a lot of really supportive things with architecture and physical, tangible resources. If we see, Mercury in Capricorn, this is someone who would definitely have a career in writing. There would be more of a lean towards that, even though that because of the uphill battle that comes with that Mercury within that third house there, and that Mercury related to Capricorn, there's going to be more of a career that's going to be focused around speaking, that is going to be built over time, and focused on their opinion, their voice, their writing, their journals, their lived experience. These are the ones that have biographies written about them, or they're self-published biographies, or they self-publish a lot of their own stories and their own kind of experiences, or even just speak on their own experiences and teach those to a younger generation as well. Mercury in Aquarius in the third, these are once again grant writers. I see that a lot with people that are really great advocates, really great picket line sort of people that are really speaking up against a lot of different things. They're also really great at social media. Mercury Aquarius in the third would be really, really great for that. And social media managers. Mercury Aquarius typically has that in general, but in the third, it has a lot more of a focus on what information I'm bringing and those sorts of things. Mercury and Sag in the third, this is going to be an interesting one because this is going to create a very philosopher-student kind of relationship with their own mind. So they can definitely have a lot of philosophy to bring. These are the ones that could be those gurus, be those teachers, be those sort of mentors, mentees, those sorts of things. And they have a lot to teach. They have a lot of knowledge. They like to just soak up a bunch of different not necessarily facts, but faith. And these are the preachers of the zodiac with Mercury and Sag. And the ones that are really, really speaking on something really philosophical and religious or powerful in that regard. So there's definitely aspects of that there. And then when we see Mercury in Libra in the third, I already kind of went over this, but there is definitely a focus around communicating and writing with their partner. So this could be someone who could write something with their partner in specific, or with just the public, or law, or fashion, or any sort of thing that is related to creating harmony. They could definitely be really good at writing that. These are the really great mitigators, and the ones, the in-betweens. Anyone that has Libra in the third is going to have a lot more support with that too. Now, when it comes to having Mercury and Gemini in the third, there is definitely a doubling up on this quality. So when you have Mercury in its own sign, and it's in the third house, it's going to definitely communicate quite rapidly. And so that's why it's really important, if you have Mercury and Gemini in the third house, to really understand that the Mercury delineations and Mercury importance is going to really, really keep hitting you, like be really, really prominent, really, really important in a lot of regards. So yeah, Mercury has a lot to do in the third house. There's a lot of conversations to be had, a lot of information to kind of process, lots of things to kind of work through. And at the end of the day, if you have Mercury in the third house, it's really important to understand the information that's being presented to you and find the right words for it, and know what it is that you want to talk about. Know what it is you want to focus your attention towards. We see that a lot with Mercury, is your ability to kind of adapt your own thought process, your own perspective on a lot of different things. And so I urge you to really look at specifically your own Mercury aspects and your own things. Obviously, if you guys want any sort of reading or any sort of delineations from me, feel free to reach out to me on the website below. And I would love to help you and understand your Mercury placement and what's kind of going on within that, and kind of really tease that information out with you. Because I know how important your opinion, your voice is, and I really want you to own that voice and own that power that Mercury is trying to give you within that third house, to share your story, share your opinion, and really find the right words for what you have gone through, what you're going through, and what you can help others go through and get through as well. So at the end of the day, Mercury in the third, you guys have a lot to say and a lot of information that you've gone through, a lot of young upbringing information that needs to be unlearned, worked through, talked about. Talk therapists are great for Mercury in the third house people, but also journaling, writing, finding the right routines that work within your own Mercury sign and with their own house there. Obviously, this is like a short version. Obviously, you're going to want to wait to see if your Mercury is any sign after Gemini. You want to wait to see when those videos come out to see how that kind of works within this as well. But I really appreciate you guys for being here and listening to this and going through this with me, because Mercury is quite a doozy to talk about, especially on a Mercury Gemini energy. It's quite a lot. It's quite a lot of different things that Mercury does, and Mercury in Gemini is quite strong. As it's in its home sign of Gemini. So make sure that you are utilizing the information that's being given to you, and you're gathering that stuff and utilizing your mind and the active nature that you are really, really wanting to with Mercury in the sign of Gemini. So I appreciate you guys. Mercury in the third housers, Mercury in Gemini, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much for being here today. And once again, if you guys have any questions about anything, feel free to reach out to me on my website. Yeah, I love you guys. I'm going to talk to you guys soon.